like to start with giving a basic introduction to water diplomacy. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, I work for water diplomacy developed by the Geneva Water Hub, as well as USCA News. USCA News was established in Washington about 20 years ago and was the world's most influential source of water news, but it had a very expensive subscription, and most people could not access water news unless they paid that very expensive subscription. At which point the Geneva Water Hub decided to approach USCA News and say, can we have a free of charge subscription so that people can access a summary of international water news as well as local water news free of charge. That is when the Water Diplomat was born. It was established in 2019, and we are in fact a part and a member of the Global Observatory on Water and Peace. There was a global high-level panel on water and peace established in 2017, consisting of 11 countries, member states of the UN, who saw international water cooperation as a vehicle for peace and for international cooperation. And it was seen that the media would be an important voice within that. So the Water Diplomat observes international trends in media reporting on water issues, and we are integrated into the global panel on water and peace. So let me just mention a few things about water diplomacy and why we think it's important. I think other speakers have alluded to the fact that we believe that water is at the center of all SDGs. Okay, if you talk about, let's say, gender, right? In order to have good menstrual hygiene at schools, we need to have sanitation facilities, menstrual hygiene facilities, access to water at school. If you do not have that, teenage girls will stop attending school. So water level, the management of water at the local level in the villages is often the domain of women. And we find that at the international level, the integration of women into the leadership of international water diplomacy is still weak, and there's a lot of work to be done on that field. So I'm just mentioning one SDG, which is gender. I can mention biodiversity. The entire world's biodiversity depends on water. All life depends on water. I can mention any economic field, whether it's tourism, agriculture, industry, mining, they all require large quantities of water to be supplied. I can mention all kinds of issues related to climate change, but we believe that water is very, very important. So water is a cause of conflict. Sometimes when it is scarce, there can be a competition over the access to resource, but it can inspire peace-building initiatives, cooperation and security. And the act of hydro diplomacy is the whole act of bringing together around the table all the actors related to the management of a shared resource. So if you have a river basin, you'll find mines, you will find cities, you will find agricultural zones, which the lady just mentioned. There are natural zones where people want to go and relax in the weekend. There may be natural parks, all in the same area, and the balance between all of that is a question of hydro diplomacy. This can be at the international level, it can be at the transboundary level, transboundary basins, it can be at the national level, and it can be at the level of national watersheds. So that means at the level of a river basin. There can be conflicting demands which need to be resolved through discussion and dialogue. So I've taken some definitions of water diplomacy. One comes from what is called the Global Water Partnership. That is a global dialogue on water, which is organized into national chapters and regional chapters, and in fact, continental chapters. So we have the Global Water Partnership Africa, which is broken up into regional frameworks for Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, North Africa, West Africa, etc. And the Global Water Partnership is a federation of all those organizations at the international level. And they say water diplomacy aims to ensure regional cooperation using water resources management as an entry point to create solution spaces for broader cooperation. The Stockholm International Water Institute, which brings together all the international experts on water every year in Stockholm, they say water diplomacy is an approach that enables a variety of stakeholders to access ways to contribute to finding solutions for joint management of shared freshwater resources. So these are two definitions of water resources. What I think is very important is that often when we think about water diplomacy, we tend to think about international, at the international level, between countries who have a shared river basin, such as the Nile. There are 11 countries sharing the Nile, and we think about water diplomacy as the relations between those states. But I think I would like to challenge that. It's not just at the level of transboundary basins. I think at the national level, we have competing uses for water. We have people who want to have protect nature and have national parks. We have people who want to exploit mining. You can imagine that those two are in conflict with each other. We have people who want to expand the urban use of water at the cost of rural agriculture. So there are many issues at national level which need to be resolved through a national water partnership. Now, most countries have a national water partnership where these dialogues take place, and they are often in conflict with each other. And peace building and water diplomacy takes place at the national level as well. And within a particular river basin, the same discussions can take place between a mining authority, people managing a dam, a local municipality would like to have more water, etc., etc. So I think that the level of water diplomacy can go right down to the local level. It's not just transboundary. I'd also like to say that water is natural capital. We can see it as natural capital. And it means it is a way of producing ecological goods and services. So it relates to the physical environment, the biosphere, society, and the economy. As I've said, it stretches very, very wide. And in the physical environment, we talk about the management of the climate. I mean, the trends, what can we say, the transfer of temperature through the water currents of the ocean influence our climate. In atmosphere, there is a transfer of heat through the atmosphere, which influences our rainfall, etc. So the physical environment of water influences our temperature regulation. It influences our climate. It influences the shaping of our landscapes. You know, rivers shape the landscape. But if we move to the biosphere, water is also essential for life itself. The interaction between the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nutrient cycle, which means that water interacts with plants, creating carbon, trees, plants, etc., absorb carbon from the atmosphere and grow, and nitrogen is absorbed from the soil in that interaction. So it's essential to life itself. And as I mentioned, water is essential to society for health, for hygiene, for leisure. It can be a religious symbol as well, and it is central to many aspects of our culture. And at the economic level, the economy depends on water for agriculture, industry, mining, etc. So it's almost impossible to understate the role of water. It goes so far. And then if you look at water management, you have to think at an integrated perspective to bring all of these perspectives into one vision. And that requires negotiation, discussion, and that is why all this diplomacy is needed. So just to give you a short overview, I don't want to take too much time on this, but to mention that the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm was the first international moment at which water was mentioned as an issue of international importance. And this conference was the origin of many environmental laws, and it includes some aspects of water management, such as the idea that water should be managed at the level of a river basin, that is the appropriate institution. Rather than having provincial or national authorities, ministries running water, it is better to decentralize it to the river basin level, because that is the ecological unit at which a hydrological cycle is operating. Then we had the first UN conference in 1977 on water, Mar del Plata, and we are now having the first such conference in 46 years again. So it's a gap of 46 years since Mar del Plata. This is why it's a historic event that is taking place in New York in 2023. The UN conference at Mar del Plata was it's the origin of international cooperation on what we call decades for action on water. This is when the United Nations agreed that there would be a global push to enhance access to drinking water and sanitation. And since the 1970s, we have global reports reporting on access of each country in terms of how are they doing in terms of access to drinking water and sanitation. So this has been moving since the 1970s, and as you can see, is still continuing today. Then we have the Conference on Water and the Environment in Dublin in 1992, which is the origin of thinking at the river basin level, integrated water resources management. It is the origin of standards on water and gender. So if you want to look at international rules on gender inclusion in water, you can look to that Dublin conference. And it is the origin of the concept of subsidiarity, which means that water should be managed at the lowest appropriate level. It is a very local concern, and preferentially, it should be decentralized as much as possible. The ministries, the provincial governments should be handing the authority in as far as possible. Of course, there are things that need to be managed at the national level, but as far as possible, it should be locally managed. And unfortunately, Dublin was also the beginning of some kind of controversy about whether water should be managed by private entities or by public entities, especially because of the privatization tendencies of water in cities, where water was increasingly managed by private companies. And there are now, in fact, I just wrote an article about the takeover of Xylem took over Evoluon and is now had bought the second water company and has created a joint company to the value of 7.6 billion euros or USD. So it's now the second biggest water company in the world, and they are offering their services to all kinds of municipalities. So there's some controversy around public or private management of water. Then the, I don't know why this is in French, but I had translated it. But let me say the conference on the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, which many of you know as environmentalists. This was an important moment, and many decisions were taken on climate change, on biodiversity, on desertification. What is maybe less known is that Chapter 18 of the Declaration is completely dedicated to water, and there are many norms and values which are embedded in there. Then I can take you to two UN conventions, the United Nations Convention on Water Courses, 1992, and the Convention on the Protection and Utilization of Water Courses, the UNECE Convention. So there are two big international water conventions which regulate the way in which water is managed between countries at the international level. I see. This is. I seem to have included that French slide in this presentation. Then I must say we've been talking about the human rights of water. So the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights of the Human Rights Council. Yes.
First, you just make that interactive.
Please.
You talked about the real conference.
Yes. 1992.
That was a major milestone in terms of conversations on environment.
Yes.
Would you want to talk a little bit more in terms of how the conversations that we have?
Okay.
And then I know after 1992 there was the agendas that came with water. So basically, I think water is very, very important. Maybe even as you proceed with the conversation, you want to let us know what are some of the conversations that we lost along the way from Rio, because heads of states and went to Rio on us, including our then president, unfortunately. So some of those conversations are very key in terms of how we approach on issues of water.
Okay. No, sure. I think 1992 was a landmark moment, and it resulted in three conventions. There's a convention on drought and desertification, UNCCD. There is the Convention on Climate Change, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and we have the United Nations, the Convention on Biological Diversity. So these were three major international conventions which came out of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. Now, I think that it's very unfortunate that we didn't have a convention on water at that time, because we believe that water underlies all of these issues, whether it's desertification is the absence of water, drought is the absence of water, the biodiversity loss that we have at the moment, the highest biodiversity loss that we have is in fresh water. When we talk about climate change, as I said, water and climate are very interrelated, and you'll see that in the course of this next week. So I feel actually, although the water agenda moved forward in 1992, we missed the opportunity to have a separate water convention. And since then, there's been a lot of soft law, such as the soft law on integrated water resources management, but this is not the same as having international convention. And in the meantime, I think it took until I was going to come to this point here, in 2002, the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights came from a human rights angle and said, look, water is actually a human right. We have to reserve a small portion of whatever, a small portion for everybody to access for their personal hygiene. If it is part of the right to health, because if you don't have water of sufficient quality, your health will decline. Therefore, this was suddenly an opportunity to bring water back into the international legal framework and say, can we have maybe a look at water from the perspective of human rights? And that is the importance of 2002, which was later endorsed in 2010 by the UN General Assembly, saying the human right to water is in fact a human right. But we still don't have an international convention on water in that sense. Now, we'll talk about water law later, in fact, at the end of the week, so I don't want to go into too much detail on it, but just to say that I think that although there's more and more norms on water, we still are missing a big dialogue. And this is, again, the importance of this conference, to bring to the fore the importance of water at the international level.
Yeah, and also that, I also think it's important that even as we get into the discussions on water, we also think about the same summit. We're talking about the 1992. And here, reference to the Agenda 21, you know, one on issues of sustainable development. So that book of Agenda 21 is something that I usually tell journalists that you need to read Agenda 21 as you read the SDGs. And sometimes it's also important that you visit the MDGs if you want to be in the real conversation of how water issues are.
I completely agree, and I would say Agenda 21, Chapter 18 is on water, and we'll talk about the SDGs and MDGs in the next few days. I don't want to take too much of your time, but just to repeat that we had the 9th World Water Forum in March last year, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague and friend, Dr. Barry, who can tell you a lot more about the 9th World Water Forum. And you've had a presentation for Tajikistan about the second high-level conference on water and sustainable development, which was a preparatory conference for New York. And I'll leave it there. I think I'll just say thank you to you, and